Clara Morgan had lived alone for nearly 20 years in a modest white cottage just beyond the edge of Millersville. Her house stood quietly beside a row of old oaks, wrapped in ivy, shadowed by time. In her youth, Clara had been vibrant, a spirited schoolteacher known for her storytelling and the gentle kindness in her eyes. Now, her world had slowed. She moved with care, spoke softly, and existed in a hush of memories. Each day began the same. She would rise at dawn, dress in layers of faded sweaters, and walk to the mailbox at the end of the gravel path. She didn't expect letters anymore, mostly bills or the occasional pamphlet from the church. But still, the ritual remained. Until the morning of November 3rd. That day, the sky was a pale shade of grey, and the wind carried a cold bite that hinted at the winter to come. Clara opened the mailbox and blinked. Among the advertisements and an envelope from the electric company was something strange, an envelope, yellowed and worn at the edges, with handwriting that made her heart still. Her hands trembled as she lifted it, and the world seemed to narrow to that single fragile object. The ink was slightly faded, the address written in a script she hadn't seen in more than 5 decades. It was Jonathan's handwriting. She took it inside without speaking. Her fingers ran across the name again and again, as if touching it would summon him. Jonathan Reed had been the great love of her life. They had met in the summer of 1968 when Clara was 20 and Jonathan was 2 years older, recently enlisted. He'd walked into the bakery where she worked part-time and asked for a croissant. She handed it to him with a smile, and he asked her to dinner the very next day. They fell for each other with the certainty that only young hearts can know. Their love was not loud or dramatic, it was warm, steady, full of letters, shared dreams, and whispered promises beneath starlit skies. Then he was drafted. He wrote to her every day from the military camp and then later from the war. Clara wrote back with unwavering devotion. Her letters were filled with news from home, drawings of the life they would build, small children with messy hair, a garden of lavender and thyme, a cabin beside a lake. But one day, the letters stopped. Weeks passed, and then came the telegram. She remembered the exact words, though she had never read it more than once. "We regret to inform you that Private Jonathan Reed is missing in action. Presumed dead." The world had collapsed. The months that followed were a blur of crying until she had no tears left, of sleeping beside the box of letters, of clutching a photo of him in uniform. Time did not heal so much as numb. Eventually, she learned to smile again. She married Thomas, a kind, gentle man who knew better than to compete with a ghost. Together, they had a quiet marriage, no children, just long years of calm companionship. But Jonathan never left her. She had buried the memory like a seed in her chest, where it grew roots of longing and sorrow. Now, this letter. Clara sat in her living room, wrapped in a shawl, the letter before her. She opened it slowly, careful not to tear the brittle edges. "My dearest Clara," it began. "If you're reading this, then something impossible has happened." She paused, her breath catching. "I wrote this from a hospital tent outside Da Nang. I was injured a few nights ago. It's not as bad as it sounds, just a deep gash on my leg, but they insist I rest. So here I am, finally still long enough to write to you in peace." Clara's eyes blurred as she read. "Every night, I dream of you. I see your smile, hear your laugh, feel the softness of your hand. Do you remember the cabin by the lake we always talked about? With the blue shutters and the rocking chairs? I dream of that place now. In the dream, you're sitting on the porch, reading a book, and I'm beside you, old and grey, drinking coffee and watching the sunset." She could see it. "Clara, I don't know what's going to happen to me. There are things I've seen that I can't explain. things that change a man. But through all of it, loving you is what's kept me whole. The letter ended with a line that broke her. If I don't come home, promise me this, live the life we dreamed of. Don't wait for me. But don't forget me either. I'll be waiting for you, somewhere the stars touch the lake, where time is kind and love never ends. Clara pressed the letter to her lips. She had waited her entire life to hear from him again, and now, here he was, speaking through the dust of years. The days that followed were slow and strange. Clara could not go an hour without reaching for the letter. She read it in the morning with her tea, again after lunch, and once more before sleep. She traced the loops of Jonathan's signature with her fingertip, memorizing every curve and line like it was scripture. It was as if he had returned to her in spirit, a whisper from the past that refused to fade again. She wondered how the letter had found its way to her. Perhaps it had been lost in a pile, rediscovered by a clerk or a soldier's descendant. She would never know. But she began to believe that it had arrived when it was supposed to, when she needed it most. That weekend, she climbed into the attic and pulled out the box. It had been untouched for years. Inside were more than 100 letters, Jonathan's and hers. The smell of old paper and ink filled the air like a ghost. She sat on the floor with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders and began to read. She laughed at the silly drawings Jonathan had made of the two of them fishing, their exaggerated features childlike and joyful. She wept at the lines where he spoke of his fears. And she felt herself come alive again, like a seed watered after decades of drought. On Sunday evening, as the sky turned dusky purple, Clara stood in front of her mirror. She hadn't really looked at herself in a long time. Her face was marked with age, her silver hair tied in a bun. But her eyes, those were the same eyes Jonathan had once said were as endless as the sea. She made a decision. Clara called her lawyer on Monday morning and asked to have her affairs reviewed. Then she went online and found a listing, a lakefront cottage in northern Vermont, not far from a town called Linton. It had blue shutters. The photos showed a porch, rocking chairs, and a garden patch in desperate need of love. She bought it the next day. When the real estate agent asked if she was sure, Clara simply said, "I'm going home." Packing was emotional. Every item in her house carried a story. But she took only what mattered: the box of letters, a few books, her late husband Thomas's watch, he had passed 10 years ago, and Jonathan's photograph in a carved wooden frame. Her neighbors were surprised but supportive. Mrs. Kenny across the street wept and gave her a jar of plum jam. "You always looked like you were waiting for something," she said. "Maybe now you'll find it." The drive north was long but not difficult. The trees were fire-colored, leaves dancing in the wind like pieces of flame. Clara listened to old songs on the radio, songs she and Jonathan had once danced to in her parents' kitchen. The cottage was even more beautiful in person. It had been neglected, but its bones were strong. The lake shimmered in the sunlight, and the trees stood tall like sentinels guarding her arrival. For a moment, Clara stood at the edge of the dock and let the wind wrap around her. It smelled of pine and memory. She moved in quietly. There was no furniture yet, only her rocking chair and a mattress on the floor. But the space felt full with memory, with love, with the ghost of dreams long deferred. In the weeks that followed, she repaired the garden. She planted lavender, rosemary, and wild daisies. She painted the shutters a fresh shade of blue, fixed the screen door, and patched the roof with the help of a local handyman named Joe. Joe was kind and didn't ask many questions. But one day, as they drank lemonade after fixing the front step, he said, "This place seems like it was waiting for you." Clara smiled. Maybe we were waiting for each other. As the season turned to winter, The lake froze and the snow arrived like a soft blanket. Clara began writing again, not emails, not texts, but real letters. She addressed them all to my dearest Jonathan, placing each one in a special box she kept beside her bed. In her letters, she described her days, the birds that came to her feeder, the sunrise that looked like a painting, the sound of silence broken only by the creak of her rocking chair. One letter read, "I never thought I would find you again, but I see you in everything here. The wind carries your name, and the water reflects your eyes. I am old now, Jonathan. But I still feel young when I talk to you. Thank you for waiting for me." She never mailed them. She didn't need to. The small town began to know her. Children from nearby cottages would visit her porch for cookies and stories. There was one little girl, around 7 years old, with curly red hair and an infectious laugh. Her name was Emily. One day, Emily brought her younger brother along, Michael. Clara stared at the two children with wonder. The names matched the ones from Jonathan's letter, Emily and Michael, the children they had dreamed of. Clara never mentioned it to the children's mother. But in her heart, she believed it was a sign. A gift. She began teaching Emily how to knit. Michael liked to listen to Clara read aloud, especially stories about brave soldiers, magical lakes, and cabins with blue shutters. Clara's life grew full again. One night, she took the box of letters and walked down to the frozen lake. She sat on a log, watching the stars shimmer above her. The sky was so clear she could see the constellations Jonathan had once traced with his finger on her palm. She held the letter he'd written, the one that had started it all. "If I don't come home," he had written, "live the life we dreamed of." And she had. Winter deepened around the lake, laying a hush over everything. The wind no longer whispered, it sighed. Clara's days grew slower, and she found herself tiring more easily. But her heart was full, and her spirit lighter than it had been in decades. She often sat by the window, writing. Her letters to Jonathan had become more reflective, more like conversations than updates. In them, she thanked him for giving her the courage to begin again, even so late in life. One such letter read, "The first time I saw you, I felt something shift. The air changed. Maybe time folded, and the future whispered in my ear, here he is. You left, but you never truly left me. Not really. You were with me when I held Thomas's hand as he passed. You were there when I woke up crying on anniversaries I never admitted to remembering. You were there when I smiled again, when I danced alone in the kitchen. I carried you, Jonathan. And now, I see that you carried me too." Clara started to prepare for spring. She ordered flower seeds and a rocking chair for the other side of the porch, just in case, she told the delivery man with a twinkle in her eye. Emily and Michael became her constant companions. They would bring their drawings and read her their stories. Clara encouraged their imagination, and in them, she saw reflections of the life she might have lived, had fate been kinder long ago. One sunny afternoon in March, Clara brought out a small, wrapped package. She handed it to Emily. "This," Clara said, "is for when I'm not around anymore." Emily frowned. "Don't say that." Clara smiled gently. "Even stars go quiet, child. But they still shine." Inside the package was Jonathan's last letter, along with a note in Clara's handwriting. "This is a story of love that waited. And if you ever wonder what love looks like when it's real, it looks like this. It endures. It remembers. It finds a way." As spring approached, Clara's body grew weaker. The once light steps down to the dock became a slow, deliberate journey. She began to spend more time in her rocking chair, watching the lake thaw, watching life emerge. One night, She awoke to a dream more vivid than any she had ever known. Jonathan was standing at the edge of the dock, wearing the same uniform he'd worn in the photograph. He was young, his face glowing in the moonlight. "You found the house," he said. Clara nodded, tears in her eyes. "I found you." He smiled and held out his hand. "Come walk with me." She reached for him, but woke up in bed, the dream still fresh like morning dew. That morning, Clara brewed a cup of tea, sat in her rocking chair, and opened the last letter Jonathan had written. She read it one final time. Then, she placed it in her lap, leaned her head back, and closed her eyes. That was how Emily found her, peaceful, eyes shut, a faint smile on her face, the wind gently lifting the edges of the letter still resting in her lap. Clara Morgan passed away on a warm spring morning, with the smell of fresh earth and blooming lavender in the air. She was 89 years old. Her funeral was small but beautiful. Townsfolk came to pay respects, and so did people who had once been strangers, now changed by the presence of her kindness. Emily, now 11, read a note Clara had left just for the occasion. "Don't mourn me. I've had a beautiful life. I got to love twice, once in promise, once in peace. I've seen the world change and still found beauty in it. And now, I go to find the one who waited for me in letters and dreams. I go to where the stars touch the lake." She was buried near the cottage, beneath a weeping willow, with Jonathan's photograph placed beside her headstone. The inscription read, "Clara Morgan. Beloved teacher. Fierce dreamer. Love never dies. It only waits." Afterward, Emily and Michael continued to visit the blue-shuttered cottage. Their mother turned it into a community reading house, just as Clara would have wanted. The rocking chair remained on the porch, gently creaking in the wind, as if still holding the weight of a memory. Sometimes, on late evenings, Emily would sit by the dock and swear she saw two figures standing side by side, hands entwined, gazing across the lake. She never spoke of it. She simply smiled, knowing love had come full circle. And somewhere, beyond time and tide, beneath a sky where stars touched water, Clara and Jonathan finally sat together again, home at last.